Hello, this is chapter 5 of The Living Isle from Talia's perspective. I'd never despised walking through our village as much as I did this morning. As soon as the three of us walked out our front door, it was like there was a giant target floating over our heads, telling everyone to point their eyes in our direction. Mother had calmed herself down enough to get dressed into her uniform, and the three of us walked side by side down the street, slowly, calmly, looking at nothing but the street in front of us. No matter how hard I tried to ignore the people we passed, voices caught in my ears like fish landing in a net. A woman, Mrs. Gallowin, from a few houses down, said to another neighbour, Mrs. Norton, as we walked by, "Those girls will end up in the cells just like him." How dare she say such a thing? I turned and glared at them, but a firm tug on my sleeve from Sophia shifted my eyes away from them. I lifted my chin and walked on. When we reached the turn-off between where I would have to walk down the hill to school and Mother and Sophia would have to walk up to the hospital, I froze. As much as their silence was infuriating, having them there beside me was a show of solidarity, even if it felt like our family had been torn apart. Father was far from us now, but the image of him being carted away still burned in my mind. "Be strong," Sophia whispered before walking away with Mother. Her comment did not sit well with me. I was always strong, but I knew what she really meant. Be quiet. Eyes followed me down the hill as I descended towards the school, but I kept my eyes focused on the bell at the top of the chapel, chiming to signal for the students from both the primary and secondary sections of the school to come to the chapel for morning prayers. Things only got worse once I reached the gates and couldn't avoid the other students. Most of them usually kept their distance, admiring and envying my talent and work effort from a distance. Today, they couldn't seem to wait to talk to me. Clara, a tall, slim girl with jet black hair and a beak-like nose, sidled over to me with her friends, her arms crossed and a smug look on her face. "It was only a matter of time before something like this happened," she smirked at me. "None of you are as clever as you think you are." Her friends snickered, and for a moment I didn't care about looking respectable anymore. I just wanted that smile gone from Clara's face. I launched towards her, my hand in a tight fist, and fear flashed in her eyes. But before I could make contact, I was pulled away and around the side of the chapel. Swinging my fist around viciously, I prepared to be attacked by the girls, who had all been waiting for this chance to bring me down. "It's all right, Talia," a soothing voice said in my ear. It was my best friend Carla. She was one of the only people who I'd deemed a suitable friend when we'd first started school years ago. The fact that we both knew she would never be as bright as me meant that she didn't try to compete with me, and so we'd always been close companions, allowing the others to thrive at their appropriate level without standing. The fact that we both knew that she was never. The fact that we both knew she would never be as bright as me meant that she didn't try to compete with me, and so we'd always been close companions, allowing the other to thrive at their appropriate level without standing on anyone's toes. I loosened my fists, but did not relax. "Did you hear what she said about my family?" I spat, glaring back in the direction Clara and her friends might come around. Did you hear what she said about my family?" I spat, glaring back in the direction Clara and her friends might come from any second. I wouldn't let her get away with it that easily a second time. "Yes, I heard her," Carla said, for some reason struggling to meet my eyes. Jutting my chin forward, I tried to make her look at me. "You don't believe them, do you? What they're saying about my family?" "No, of course not. It's just—" "Then what? You think my father is a criminal?" Carla tucked her short hair behind her ears. "Of course not, but why would they arrest him for no reason?" she muttered. I couldn't believe her. "You're supposed to be my friend." "I am, and I always will be. I didn't mean to upset you." She took my hand and gave it a tight squeeze. It did nothing to comfort me, only made me more agitated at her feeble attempt to go back on what she'd just said. "Which is what makes what I have to tell you so much worse." I studied Carla's face, her round cheeks that looked like two sugar-glazed buns. She rubbed a hand over her button nose and then looked down at the thick grass. What more could she possibly say to make things worse? Staying quiet, I waited for her to talk and just get out whatever she needed to say. When they came to take your father away, which is awful and a true shame, they sent another rider from the castle to my house. You see, my father's business at the wharf has been doing so well, and Mother is the most competent accountant in the village. What does that have to do with anything? I exclaimed. Carla pushed her hair behind her ears again and shuffled her feet around on the grass. I hated when she was afraid to speak up. Tell me, I cried. It's just that the king feels my family could do a great deal for the Isle from closer to the castle. She looked up at me, her eyes looking even more droopy than normal. They've offered my family a house in the castle grounds. I stepped away from her as the Isle tilted on an angle, the horizon beyond the sea like a diagonal blue road. Gripping the thick stone chapel wall behind me, my mouth dropped open, but I couldn't speak. Talia, I'm so sorry, Carla pleaded, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away from her, forcing myself to meet her eyes. You mean the house that was meant for my family? I retaliated. It became available and they needed a family to... You're stealing my family's house, I cried, tears welling in my eyes. Please don't think of it like that. We can't refuse an offer like this. Yes, you could. Wait your turn like everyone else. Carla looked so pathetic standing there beside the chapel, the pleats of her pinafore hanging awkwardly over her curvy hips. She wasn't that smart. She didn't work hard. Her parents had only ever been average. Why were they getting what my family was entitled to? I stormed away from her, across the field towards the cliff's edge and the sea beyond. There was nothing out there except boring grey waves and a few fishing boats crawling out for the day, with seagulls dipping low around them. To my right, far up on the mountains, Highwick Castle looked so glorious as ever. Oh no. To my right, far up on the mountains, Highwick Castle looked as glorious as ever, the morning sun reflecting off its windows. It looked even better at night when the lanterns were lit. It was how it got its name, Highwick, the candle on top of the aisle, beaming its light down upon us all. Ever since Carla and I were little, we'd spent nearly every lunch break laying on the grass, staring up at Highwick Castle, picturing what our lives would be like up there. We imagined the new friends we'd make, children that had grown up in Highwick, who had never had to screw up their nose at the smell of fish at the market or deal with the monotony of life in a seaside town. We thought about the jobs we would get. I would be in business like my father, and Carla would become a nanny for the children of the high-profile residents. There had seemed no point in crushing her dream when it had seemed so distant, almost impossible, that she could really make it there. I'd always believed I'd be the first one to actually make it out there from our class. Now it all felt like a cruel joke. Highwick stood up there, mocking me. Carla had followed me across the field and crept up beside me. I'm sorry, Talia, she mumbled. I crossed my arms and looked out over the sea. There was no way I could forgive her for this. Sighing deeply, she wiped a tear from her eye. Things will right themselves. Your dream can still come true too. I pretended not to hear her, staring out across the endless water towards where the other two isles were, just beyond view. Girls! We spun around, and Miss Crosby on the other side of the field. Girls! We spun around, and Miss Crosby was on the other side of the field behind the chapel, hands on her hips. You're going to be late for morning prayer. The bell was still chiming insistently, but I was never late. I couldn't let it start today. We ran back across the grass. Sorry, Miss Crosby, Carla muttered. I hear congratulations are in order, Miss Worthington, Miss Crosby said to Carla, her thin eyebrows raised into an arc. I hear congratulations are in order, Miss Worthington. I hear congratulations are in order, Miss Worthington, Miss Crosby said to Carla, her thin eyebrows raised into an arch. It's been quite a shock, Carla replied. I'm sure it has, but everyone gets what they deserve in the end. Miss Crosby cast an obvious look towards me. Carla's face reddened and she curtsied awkwardly, hurrying away towards the front of the chapel. "I hope you don't expect to get out of class today, Miss Middleton." Miss Crosby sneered at me over her oval glasses. If she was anyone other than the headmistress, I would have glared at her and told her to mind her own business. But I kept my face as neutral as I could, though I was burning inside, and dropped into a curtsy. "Of course not, Miss Crosby." "Good, because we don't play favourites around here, as you well know." I nodded, though I knew it was an utter lie. Miss Crosby had her favourites, in particular Clara and her snooty friends. I tried to tell myself she never gave me extra help like she did for them because she knew I didn't need it. But really, it was jealousy. She didn't like that my family had been on our way up, leaving her and the rest of the other teachers stuck in Rindle. Now she was taking pleasure watching me tumble back to where she was. "Get to the chapel," she ordered. As I skulked back around to the front of the chapel, wondering what it must be like for Miss Crosby to know she would never be asked to move to Highwick. She wasn't married, and though she had a good job, this crummy village was it for her. I'd never thought about the possibility of having to spend my whole life in Rindle until that moment, and I shuddered at I'd never thought about the possibility of having to spend my whole life in Rindle until that moment, and I shuddered at the thought. Until this morning, the path had been clear, but things were getting ripped away from me from all directions, and I feared for my future. All of a sudden it seemed hollow and grim, just like Miss Crosby's. The pews in the chapel were already full of students, as well as the teachers around the edge of the vast hall. I joined the back of the line, filing inside, and spotted Carla sitting up the front where we usually sat together. As people turned and noticed me, the whispers started again, bouncing off the tall walls and wooden ceiling. I slunk into a seat at the back near some younger boys. They too must have heard all about what happened this morning, but seemed more interested in... I slunk into a seat at the back near some younger boys. They too must have heard all about what happened this morning, but seemed more interested in flicking each other with a rubber band than engaging with me. Miss Crosby pulled the doors open, sealing us in. She remained nearby, watching me over her glasses. The chapel went silent as Pastor Morrissey ambled out of the back room and took his place in the centre of the plinth. He cupped his hands and held them up in front of him as everyone bowed their heads. He spoke his usual words about the history of our people, how the 3 Isles had once only been one, and had been split into 3 by our royal family in order to provide us with a safe new land, away from tyranny and famine, where our people would grow and succeed. If anyone had asked me to, I could have repeated the pastor's speech back to him word for word. I'd heard it every weekday since my 5th birthday. The only thing that had been normal today was the service, and I took comfort in the The only thing that had been normal today was the service, and I took comfort in the familiarity of the words. "We shall give thanks to those who moulded our land." I spoke the first line along with everyone else, just as I was expected to. "Their selfish actions brought us a sanctuary that will be ours forever." As I spoke the second line, the words felt heavy in my mouth. "May their descendants continue to help us thrive." Their descendants, including the king that had ordered my father to be taken away. I opened my eyes and peeked at the students surrounding me. Everyone else seemed to be speaking the words, obediently, as we were all expected to. A bitter taste settled in my mouth, like I'd eaten something rotten. "We will praise them, the givers of life and freedom for all of our days. We will praise them, the givers of life and freedom for all of our days." For the first time in my life, I found myself not wanting to give praise to the royals. I did not feel grateful for them after this morning. My father had spent every day serving them, as we all did, and now he was going to jail because of that letter with the royal sigil on top. Everyone opened their eyes, and Pastor Morrissey uttered his closing remarks. "Go about your day of learning with them in your minds and hearts." I would do just that. The very royal family whose ancestors had brought us such triumph had destroyed my family in the matter of a single morning. They had ruined everything. There was no way to avoid the gaze of the students and teachers as they filed out of the chapel past me. The more words of gossip and rumours I heard, the harder it was getting to remind myself how strong I was. They were breaking me down, and most of them looked pleased to see it. If jealousy was a colour, today it was a deep, dark green. It only got worse when I got to my first class. Sinking into the seat at the front of the class beside Carla, I angled myself away from her and stared at the board so I wouldn't have to see her sad eyes. Halfway through the class, Miss Crosby knocked and came in and said that Carla was allowed to go home to prepare for her move to Highwick the following day. Carla looked over at me in desperation, maybe hoping I would cave in and congratulate her, but I just buried my head in my workbook and pretended not to notice she was leaving. I would not watch the carriage taking her family away the next day. I would not engage with her at all. The class was invited to applaud Carla, and she left sheepishly to a smattering of claps from the other students, but only the ones who were polite enough not to let their envy show. This was supposed to be my day, not hers. Clara and her friends took every chance when the teacher wasn't paying attention to bring up what had happened this morning, occasionally addressing me directly, but mostly talking amongst themselves, loud enough to ensure I'd hear. My father told me Talia's father was being sent to the First Isle, where he would never be able to return, Clara said, and her friend Amelia added, maybe they'll send her whole family there. I kept my head down and kept working, but all I wanted to do was scream and tell Clara that she didn't know what she was talking about. But as the day stretched on, their speculation and gossiping made me aware of just how little I knew. I didn't know any more than they did about what had happened to my father. My only respite was when Clara changed the topic so that she could brag about the fact that she was going to Highwick Castle next Friday to perform for the Royals. She didn't seem to recall that there were in fact 20 other girls also going as a dancer for the flyover party. I'm going to make sure I dance right in front of the prince, she told her friends, who all smiled at her like they were somehow indebted to this girl to boost her ego. The heir to Derna's throne, Prince Helm, would certainly prefer someone a little less obnoxious than her, but I'd prefer that Clara spoke about the flyover celebration than my family. The only thing was, I wasn't a dancer, and now that my family's move to Highwick had been indefinitely postponed, there would be no way that I could go as a guest either. I'd quit dancing many years ago when my father had decided my sister and I needed to focus on our schoolwork. They can't be wasting their after-school hours spinning in circles, he'd said. Mother hadn't agreed, believing that it was good for us to do something with the other girls from school, but soon enough we were doing an extra hour of homework on a Monday after school instead of our dance classes on the lawn behind the chapel. Now I was missing out, and I did not like it. The other girls would come back with stories of their time at Highwick Castle, a real luxury for anyone from Rindle. I would have to listen to it all, knowing that if things had just gone as planned, I wouldn't have been there too. I would have to listen to it all, knowing that if things had just gone as planned, I would have been there too. As soon as the chapel's final bell rang out, signalling the end of classes, I gathered my things into my arms and hurried out of the room without being dismissed. No one made any effort to stop me, which was a relief, but the rest of the villagers were not yet finished with their intrigue. They watched me ascend the street like I might do something illegal and prove what they thought they knew about father and my family. They didn't know anything about us. We were not criminals, and we were not to be looked at like sewer rats dragging a plague through our village. Holding my head high, I strode up the hill, ignoring anyone who dared to look my way, my breath shaking, my mind racing. The mid-afternoon sun was beating down on me, and by the time I got home, I was panting, sweating, and close to tears. Dropping my bag to the floor, I closed the front door and stared up at our belongings in the middle of the room. Was it a relief that we still had some of our things with us, or was it a sign that someone had told the movers not to bother picking the rest of it up, because we were never going to make it to Highwick Village? Feeling the urge to get out of this uniform and into anything that made me feel less like those horrible Rindle people, I went to the pile and yanked at one of my suitcases that I'd packed the majority of my clothes in. As I pulled at the bag, it caught on another bag and, letting the frustration of the day take over, I began to tug. It simply wouldn't budge, and as my eyes grew blurry with tears, I groaned and gave it one last pull. The clasp of the bag flung open and clothes spewed out at me and onto the floor. On the floor at my feet was a pretty white cotton frock I'd hoped to wear in the beautiful parks and streets of Highwick. Now it was no use to me. The white fabric would be dirtied by the grimy, dusty streets of Rindle and drenched in the stench of fish if I even stepped outside. Slumping down on top of the pile of bags, I gripped the dress to me, hiding my face in the soft fabric as tears ran down my cheeks. I was ashamed of myself for letting everyone get to me. I was meant to be better than this, stronger than this. The lock on the front door clinked and the door handle turned. Wiping away my tears on the dress, I pulled myself off the pile just as Sophia and Mum... Wiping away my tears on the dress, I pulled myself off the pile just as Sophia and Mother tumbled inside. They both looked like they'd been rolled over by a market cart. Mother's eyes were puffy, her face drained like she'd been crying again, and Sophia's usually flawless bun was slipping from her head and her brow was creased in a way I'd only ever seen when she was sleep-deprived. Mum normally came home much later than me or Sophia, and I noticed with a start that she wasn't wearing her head nurse apron, the red one with the right... Mum normally came home much later than me or Sophia, and I noticed with a start that she wasn't wearing her head nurse apron, the one with the white cross on the front, like she normally was when she arrived home. She walked to the bench and pulled out some potatoes and began to peel them. I opened my mouth to ask what had happened, but Sophia shook her head at me. Sophia hung her uniform, a white apron with a red cross, on the hook by the door before approaching the bench. "I'll do that, Mother," she said, taking the peeler from Mother's hand. Mother muttered her thanks and disappeared upstairs. Her bedroom door shut a moment later and the lock clicked into place. "Let's pretend today didn't happen," Sophia said over her shoulder. I felt no reason to disagree with her on that idea. Sophia and I ate dinner without Mother, and finally Sophia told me what had happened. The leadership team at the hospital had told Mother that they'd already given someone else the head nurse role that she was meant to have been. The leadership team at the hospital told Mother that they'd already given someone else the head nurse role that was meant to be vacant when she moved to Highwick, and that they didn't believe it was fair for the new head nurse to have to step down after she'd only just been hired. They reassured Mother that she still had a job at the hospital. She could stay on as a regular nurse. She hadn't been fired, but to me this demotion felt like the same thing. To go from the top to near the bottom in a matter of hours was uncalled for and unfair. Mother was being punished by the hospital for what had happened to Father. I spent a long, hot night laying awake on my bed in my mostly empty room, feeling like a visitor in my own house. Rindle had never felt like such a cage as it did tonight. The easiest thing to do would have been to unpack my belongings and wait for news of Father, but that would have been like giving in on the situation, accepting that moving to Highwick had become nothing more than a dream again. There had to be something I could do. I had to find a way to fix this and help Father. The trouble was that it was nearly impossible trying to achieve anything from here in Rindle without bringing any more shame to my family. But there had to be a way. All I had to do was come up with a plan. That's Talia's chapter 5. I'm really enjoying reading it. I don't know what to say. Thanks for watching.